The year the house became mine, the east wall stopped feeling like a wall and started feeling like an audience. That towering portrait, 7 feet of frozen silence, seemed to breathe with the room itself. I couldn't remember a version of this house where it wasn't staring back at me, though I knew such a moment had to exist. There was a time before the first brush touched canvas in 1847, before the gables and sharp dormers were hammered into place. Before those third-floor windows learned how to trap the afternoon sun and turn it into a heavy, amber glow that made everything it touched feel guilty. I inherited the place on my 31st birthday, a day that should have felt like a beginning, but instead marked the first year I blew out candles without my daughter there to count them with me. My aunt had slid the old wool across the table and murmured, "It's quite a responsibility." I nodded because that's what people expect: agreement, acceptance, grace. She meant the house, the land, the family legacy stacked so tall it could crush your ribs from the inside. She didn't mean the other burden, the one that made me wake every morning and pretend to be someone whose world hadn't collapsed. The woman who remembered to eat, to answer mail, to check for cars before stepping off a curb. Small rituals of survival that felt pointless when the one thing that mattered had already slipped away. The portrait dominated everything. Oil on canvas, framed with curls of gold that had tarnished into a sickly green. It showed Abigail Pritchard, our ancestral matriarch, perched in the same chair that now gathered dust in the blue bedroom upstairs. Her face wore that strange 19th century sadness, the kind that looked almost regal in its restraint. Her hands lay open on her lap, palms up, like she was either offering something or asking for it back. But she wasn't alone in that painting. Behind her stood a second figure. As a child, I had been told the story so many times I could recite it. Abigail's daughter, Florence. Not my Aunt Florence, another one, long gone, part of the family's endless cycle of repeated names and repeated tragedies. The women in our line were always Abigail, or Florence, or Helen, as if the family forgot how to invent new names and instead borrowed the old ones to keep the dead close. Florence's figure had been added years after Abigail died, a detail always delivered in a hushed tone, as though speaking about it too loudly might wake something. That was the part that stayed with me, the idea of painting someone into a scene after the original sitter was gone, as if the portrait was never finished, as if it waited. And the day I moved into the house, standing alone in the parlor, I felt it again. That portrait wasn't done either. It was watching. It was waiting. It was her grandmother who used to explain it with a shrug, as though it were the most natural thing in the world. Back then, you didn't replace a portrait, you added to it. Why pay for a new painting when you could simply paint the next generation right onto the old canvas? A practical tradition, she'd said. But even as a child, Helen had felt uneasy about the idea of layering the living on top of the dead. That morning, she stood in the old kitchen with its Dutch tiles and the cracked patch of plaster above the stove. A crack shaped almost exactly like a child's drawing of a tiny, crooked tree. She poured herself a cup of coffee and tried to remember whether she'd taken her medication. The bottle sat on the windowsill beside the African violet she kept forgetting existed. Every few days, she'd notice the plant again, wilted, thirsty, and marvel that it hadn't given up on her the way everything else seemed to. 2 pills. Morning and night, Dr. Kensington had reminded her, slow and patient. Helen had nodded the same way she nodded at every instruction these days. Automatic, hollow, just enough compliance to pass as a functioning human being without actually feeling like one. As she sipped her coffee, a thin, acrid scent crept through the room. Something burnt, something distant. She checked the stove cold, the fireplace empty, the outlet safe. Yet the smell wound through the air like a whisper of smoke caught in old curtains. She opened the windows. February wind sliced into the room, sharp and smelling of frozen soil, but beneath the cold still lingered that faint smell of charred something, as if a memory had caught fire and refused to burn out. It wasn't the first time the house felt wrong on her birthday. She remembered the moment last year, the night she turned 31. She'd wandered past the portrait with a glass of wine, tipsy enough that the room felt softly tilted. She had paused, watching the canvas with a sudden, uneasy awareness. The portrait had changed. She could swear it. There hadn't been just two figures anymore. A third woman had appeared behind Florence, a younger figure, one hand resting lightly on her shoulder, the other reaching outward, pointing at something Helen couldn't see. Another family update, she'd murmured to no one, though her voice didn't sound like hers. But this year, her 32nd, it was no longer a question of one additional figure. Standing in the parlor, coffee cooling between her palms, she counted 12. 12 women stretching into the background, each one placing a hand on the shoulder of the woman ahead of her. The other hand of each figure reached forward in unison, creating a hypnotic pattern of pale fingers all angling toward the front of the canvas, toward the empty chair. The chair that used to hold Abigail. The chair that Helen was almost certain had still held her last year. Now Abigail stood behind it, her fingers curled over its wooden frame like she'd just risen from it, like she'd been waiting patiently for someone else to sit down. The row of faces stretched endlessly behind Abigail's chair. Mothers, daughters, generations stacked like shadows, each one pushing the next forward. Their hands all reached the same way. Their expressions were identical, a strange almost smile that stopped just short of meaning anything at all. Helen placed her coffee cup onto its saucer, but her hand betrayed her. The porcelain trembled, announcing the fear she was trying so hard to hide. She stepped toward the portrait until she could smell the age of it, that dusty blend of varnish and time. Up close, the paint looked alive, each brushstroke deliberate, every detail disturbingly precise. She knew these women. Even without names, she recognized the echoes of her own family carved into their features. The sharp jawlines passed down like heirlooms. The widow's peak that skipped a generation then returned. The wide eyes that always looked a little too open, like they'd seen more than they should have. And they were staring forward, staring out. Staring at the empty space where someone was meant to sit. Staring at her. A sudden jolt ran through her chest, sharp and cold. She staggered back and the old floor groaned in response. Those same tired boards that had been complaining underfoot for nearly 2 centuries. They'd outlast her. They'd outlast everyone. After she was gone, the thought slipped into her mind, heavy and unwelcome. Gone, the word didn't feel like death. It felt like something else, something waiting. Mom. Helen turned. Her daughter stood in the doorway. Naomi, 7 years old. Blue dress, white collar, hair braided neatly the way she liked. Hands clasped just under her chin like she was holding a secret. She looked exactly as she had the last day Helen ever saw her. Either Helen's memory was flawless, or it had shattered so cleanly she couldn't tell what was real anymore. Sweetheart, the word came out thin, wrapped in the cotton-soft haze of her medication. Naomi tilted her head. Why are all the dead people waiting for you to sit down? They can't finish the picture until you do. The question landed like a stone dropped into deep water, ripples spreading out into a silence so thick it felt alive. Helen tried to answer. Her lips moved, then stopped, then tried again, but nothing came. She looked toward the portrait. 12 women, 12 reaching hands. The empty chair at the front glowing faintly, as if warmed by someone who had just risen from it. "What do you mean, baby?" she finally managed. But Naomi had already turned away, gliding down the hallway with quiet, careful steps. Helen stood alone in the parlor, coffee cold, heart racing, and the portrait watching her with a patience that felt older than the house itself. Something had changed. Something was waiting. The question Naomi had left hanging in the air gnawed at Helen until she couldn't breathe around it anymore. It followed her down the hall, clinging to her like cold fingers. There was only one place left in the house where answers might hide: the library. Aunt Florence, the living one, the one who mailed judgment disguised as holiday cheer, had arranged every family document in flawless rows across the old bookshelves. She believed organization cured grief. She believed Helen simply hadn't tried hard enough to move on. Helen dragged the leather binders onto the mahogany table and opened them one by one. Birth dates, marriage dates, death dates, names that appeared again and again, like echoes caught in the walls. Abigail Pritchard, born 1823, married young, died young. Florence Pritchard, born 1843, same pattern. Helen Pritchard, the first Helen, born 1863, gone by 1891. On and on the cycle went. Every woman in the bloodline had one daughter, inherited the house, and did not live to see 50. Every death was marked by the same flat, emotionless phrase: unexplained circumstances. A chill trickled through her stomach, familiar and unwelcome, something she had felt last year but hadn't dared to acknowledge. She flipped to the next binder. Old photographs slid out, thin, ghostly images beginning with shaky daguerreotypes and gradually sharpening into modern portraits. She spread them across the table into a timeline. And there it was. In each photograph, no matter the year, the portrait hung in the background. But its contents did not stay the same. In the picture from Abigail's funeral in 1873, the painting showed only Abigail sitting calmly in her chair, nothing behind her. 8 years later, at Florence's funeral, a second figure had appeared, Abigail now standing behind the chair, with Florence newly added behind her. By 1940, the canvas held 8 women. By 1978, 10. Helen's breath hitched as she reached for the newest photo, the one from her grandmother's funeral, the one taken just last year. 11 figures, 11 hands reaching, 11 faces watching, 11 ancestors waiting. She stared at the photo so long her vision began to blur. Something about the reaching hands looked closer now, as if the distance between them and the present had thinned. At the very back of the final binder, something small slipped loose and hit the table with a soft thump. A journal, bound in cracked brown leather. Its pages were brittle, stained with age. The handwriting inside was tight, deliberate. The year was 1847. The entries were ordinary at first: weather, expenses, dull notes about visitors. Then one page broke the pattern entirely. The ink here pressed so deep it nearly tore the paper. March 15. Florence will live. A price has been agreed upon. The painter accepts the burden. One life is a fair trade for the many who will follow. 1 hour in that chair is a small sacrifice compared to the cost of losing her. Helen felt the words pulse beneath her fingertips, as if the page was breathing. The house was silent. The portrait waited in the parlor, And suddenly, she understood why the chair in the painting was empty, why so many hands were reaching forward, why her daughter had asked the question she never should have known to ask. Something had been promised. Something had come due. The ink on the page looked desperate, as if the writer's hand had trembled while carving the words into the paper. She breathes tonight who did not breathe this morning. I will not question the mercy. I will not question the cost. Helen read it again, and again, a fourth time. The sentences stayed the same, but their meaning deepened in a way that made her skin prickle. Florence will live. A bargain, a cost. Someone had paid. Her fingers slid to the next page, only to brush against a ragged edge. It had been torn clean out, so had the next, and the next. Whatever Abigail wrote after sealing that bargain in 1847, someone had deliberately erased from history. You're being absurd, Helen muttered to the empty room. But her voice carried that clipped, disciplined tone all Pritchard women used when fear crept too close. The voice meant to straighten a spine, to quiet anything inconvenient in the heart. But Naomi's question kept threading through her thoughts like a whisper she couldn't shake. Why are all the dead people waiting for you to sit down so the picture can be finished? Helen pushed back from the desk and went to the window. Outside, winter was draining the color from the afternoon, the sky sinking into a cold gray, the lawn stretching out in stiff, frozen patches, the trees bare and skeletal like black veins against the light. 3 acres of land her ancestors had passed down like a burden disguised as a blessing. There beneath the old oak hung the swing Naomi once begged to use every evening. Now it dangled lifeless, the rope stiff from ice, swaying gently in the bitter wind. Farther off lay the garden where they'd planted tomatoes last summer, now just ridges of frost buried beneath aging snow. And beyond that stood the garage. White too white. Its paint bright and clean, almost unnaturally so, like a single new tooth replacing a row of old ones. The brass handle on its door gleamed even without sunlight. Helen frowned. She didn't remember hearing anyone to repaint it. She didn't remember the old handle breaking or needing to be replaced. Her palm rose almost instinctively to the window pane. The glass looked cold, but against her skin it felt warm. Then hotter. Hotter. Her breath hitched. She pulled her hand away fast, her heartbeat stuttering in her chest. A faint red mark bloomed on her palm as if she'd touched a stove, not glass. She stared at her hand in disbelief, but the window stayed dull and frosted, untouched by heat. A heaviness settled over her chest, like the weight of ancestral eyes pressing down. She turned away from the window and moved through the house, each room drenched in the accumulated years of Pritchard births, Pritchard sorrows, Pritchard obligations, and quiet grief passed from mother to daughter like a ritual. The floorboards voiced their long memory under her feet. They had always creaked. They would always creak. And as she walked deeper into the house, each protesting groan felt less like wood settling, and more like something inside the walls turning its attention toward her. The walls seemed to press inward as Helen walked, as if the entire house was breathing in her direction. Every inhale carried that same sour trace, dust, lemon oil, and underneath it something sharper, something burnt. Smoke. The whole place faintly reeked of smoke. She found Naomi in the breakfast room, legs swinging under the chair, a line of crayons arranged in perfect order beside her. Her tongue peeked out between her teeth, the way it always had when she was trying very hard to stay inside the lines. She was drawing a house. No, not just any house. This house. The steep gables, the slanted roof lines, the narrow dormers catching winter light. Every detail was exact, too exact, like she traced the blueprint straight from memory. Helen watched her daughter choose a crayon. Red, not a playful red, not the bright cherry tone kids usually pick. This one was deeper, hotter, scarlet with a hint of orange, like metal just before it melts. Helen knew that color. She didn't know how she knew it, but something in her chest tightened when she saw it. A memory half buried under medication and nightmares. "What are you drawing, sweetheart?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. Naomi didn't glance up. "Where I live." "You live here," Helen said automatically, then felt the words rot in her mouth the moment they left it. Naomi pressed the crayon hard against the paper, filling the corner with violent strokes. "The garage," she murmured. She was coloring the garage red. Every line furious and thick, like something being devoured by flame. Helen's breath caught. "I've been there a whole year," Naomi added softly, "since the fire." The sentence didn't strike like a sound. It struck like an impact, distant and delayed, as if her mind couldn't absorb it all at once. Helen felt herself detach, rising into a strange, numb vantage point where she could see the scene from above. Her daughter, 7 years old, sitting at the table coloring. Her daughter who had died a year ago. Her daughter who was sitting right there. The thing in her shape lifted its head at last. Those familiar hazel eyes held her with an expression that was perfect in every way except the one that mattered. "There wasn't a fire," Helen whispered. But Naomi, not Naomi, looked up with gentle patience. The same patience she once used to correct her dolls and teach the cat pretend lessons on the rug. "Yes, there was," she said. "Last year on your birthday." She spoke slowly, carefully, as if walking Helen through a memory she should have known. "I played with the candles from your cake in the garage. I wanted to see the wax drip so I could make shapes, but the flame got big, then bigger, then too big. It spread fast. I tried to get out." Those little hands kept coloring. "Red, deeper red." "You heard me screaming," Naomi said, "but you didn't reach me in time." Helen's legs folded beneath her. The chair caught her, but only just. The floor felt softer than it should have, as if it were preparing to swallow her whole. She stared at her daughter, her impossible daughter, and realized with a depth of horror she had never allowed herself to face. This wasn't a conversation. It was a confession. And it was only the beginning. The afternoon light had shifted. It came through the east windows now, slicing across the parlor in long, pale beams. Dust floated through them like drifting ash. The portrait waited on the wall, unchanged and yet expectant. Naomi stepped closer, still holding Helen's hand in that cold, steady grip. "Look," she whispered, as if afraid the house might hear. Helen swallowed. Her heart felt too big for her chest, thudding like it wanted to escape. The painted family in the portrait stared outward in their quiet, antique stillness. Generations of Pritchard women lined up in solemn dignity, their dresses, their faces, their hands captured forever in oil, unchanged for more than a century. But now Helen saw something she had never seen, something that hadn't been there before. In the far right of the portrait, tucked near the painted outline of the gabled garage, was a small figure, barely noticeable, almost hidden. a child in a pale nightgown. Naomi. Her painted head tilted just so, her hair falling over her shoulder the same way it did the night of the fire, the night she had run, the night she hadn't made it out. I didn't know where to go, Naomi said quietly, so I stayed here with them. They told me someone would come. Who told you? Helen whispered. Everyone who lives in the walls. The room seemed to tilt. A groan echoed through the beams overhead, as if the house itself shifted its weight to listen. Helen stepped closer to the portrait, breath trembling. The paint shimmered strangely, like heat on pavement. Naomi's small form almost looked like it was breathing shallow, faint, but undeniably real. You weren't supposed to see this yet, Naomi added. Not until tonight. Tonight, Helen's voice broke. What happens tonight? Naomi finally looked up at her, and the expression in her eyes, calm, resigned, impossibly old, froze Helen's blood. The house remembers everything you forgot, she said, and tonight it remembers the truth. The portrait behind her gave a soft crack, barely audible, the sound of old paint splitting, or something inside the frame shifting. Something getting ready to come through. Coffee inside no longer cold. Steam curled upward in a slow, ghostly ribbon. Helen stared at it, confused, her fingers trembling around the warm ceramic. It won't let you, Naomi said softly. It never lets anyone. The room seemed to exhale. The curtains trembled though no wind touched them. The portrait darkened, shadows gathering in the painted folds of dresses beneath the eyes of the waiting women. Their expressions were still, but their stillness was wrong, the wrongness of something holding its breath. Helen felt the cup grow hotter in her grip. Not burning, just warm enough to remind her she was still alive, still outside the frame. Still resisting. She set it down carefully on the floor beside her. I won't sit in that chair. You will, Naomi replied, not unkindly. Everyone does. It's what keeps the rest of us from disappearing. Helen blinked, the air thickened like wet wool. What do you mean, disappearing? Naomi shifted closer, her small hand folding over Helen's. It felt like winter water, soft, cold, without pulse. We're not ghosts, Naomi whispered. Not exactly, we're memories. The portrait holds us so we don't fade. Her voice wavered for the first time, just a fraction. Without someone new to take the chair, the portrait can't stay full. Someone has to replace the ones who grow tired. Helen looked again, really looked at the painted figures. Some of the older women were faint, their outlines softer, less defined, like pencil sketches left out in the rain. One woman's face was nearly gone, her features dissolving into a blur of pale paint. She hadn't been that faded yesterday. The realization hit Helen in the chest like a blow. The portrait wasn't just waiting for her. It was starving, and she was the meal. No, she whispered again. No, I'm not doing this. I won't let it take me. The chandelier above her rattled, one crystal falling loose and shattering at her feet. Naomi didn't react. She just watched, her expression unbearably tender, the same expression she used to give Helen after a nightmare, when she'd crawl into her mother's bed and whisper, "It's okay, I'm here." But now she said, "It doesn't matter if you want to. It happens at midnight." What happens? The exchange. A low groan rolled through the walls. Paint cracked along the edge of the portrait's frame, a hairline fracture that pulsed like a heartbeat. Helen stood again, though her legs quivered so hard she had to grip the arm of the nearest chair for support. "I'm going to leave this house." You tried that last year, Naomi said gently. Before the forgetting, you ran. You drove until the car died, and then you walked. But the road kept curving back. You came home before sunrise. Helen swallowed hard. Her throat felt tight, her breath unsteady. There has to be a way, there has to. Naomi watched her with that same patient, impossible calm. If there was a way out, don't you think one of us would have found it? The lights flickered. The floor beneath them trembled. And from inside the portrait, from the painted shadows behind the chair, something shifted, the faint suggestion of movement, as if someone were stepping forward. Someone newly awakened. Helen backed away, her hands raised like she could ward it off. I won't sit in that chair. I won't. Naomi stood too. Her blue dress seemed brighter in the growing dimness, its painted twin in the portrait flickering like candlelight. It's already decided, she said. The house won't let you choose. And then somewhere deep inside the old wooden walls, a bell chimed. One soft, distant note. The first toll of her birthday. The first warning. The first call to the chair. Family, they've been waiting for you. Helen shook her head. They're dead. Naomi's expression softened, though her eyes remained that impossible, steady hazel that no longer belonged to any living child. Everyone in that portrait was alive once. Everyone had a choice they thought they could make. Everyone believed they could outrun it. She tilted her head. But you don't outrun a promise, especially not one written in blood. Helen backed away from the door, her hand slipping from the brass handle. The cold returned, the kind that wasn't temperature at all, but realization. Fate settling its hands on her shoulders. Abigail took a step forward. The others followed, a slow tide of dresses and generations. Each footfall made the floorboards bow, as though the house itself bent to them. Helen stumbled backward, hitting the console table behind her. A picture frame toppled, then another. It sounded like bones knocking together. You don't have to be afraid, Naomi said gently. You said I don't remember, Helen whispered, her voice cracking. You said the medicine that it made me forget. Naomi nodded. It did, to make this part easier. She stepped closer. Everyone forgets right before their last birthday. It keeps them from running too soon. A tear slid down Helen's cheek. I didn't want to forget you. I know, Naomi said. That's why the forgetting wasn't perfect this time. Behind Naomi, the line of women widened, creating a corridor of bodies and dresses, and patient, painted smiles made flesh. They didn't crowd her. They didn't rush. They waited. They had all the time in the world. Eternity if she counted the portrait. Helen's breath hitched. If I sit in that chair, do I stay myself? Mostly, Naomi answered. Enough to know who you were, enough to remember me. The hallway lights dimmed, flickered, then steadied again. The portraits lining the walls, old sepia photographs, oil paintings, delicate pastels, all turned toward her. The eyes aligned, watching, expecting. A ceremony practiced for over a century. Mother, Naomi whispered, it's time. Helen pressed her back against the door as if she could merge with the wood and slip into some other world. But the door stayed solid, firm, final. I won't sit, she said again. You will, Abigail said, her voice the breath of the oldest winter. Because you are a Pritchard woman, because the price was set, because the bargain holds. Helen's knees weakened. Her fingers dug into the wood grain behind her. I didn't make that promise, but we did, Abigail said. For you, for every daughter who would come after. Helen shook her head violently, as if she could scatter the words before they settled. I'm not ready. None of us were, said the woman in the 1920s dress, stepping closer. You don't have to walk, Florence added softly. The house will take you. Naomi extended her hand. Come with me, she said. It's just one step. Helen looked down at her daughter's small fingers, pale, still, waiting. And for a terrible moment, she understood what Abigail must have felt in 1847. A mother's love. A mother's desperation. A mother's bargain. The air thickened like honey. The walls hummed. The floor seemed to tilt, nudging her forward. The chair in the parlor, the empty chair, glowed faintly, as if lit from within. Helen's body swayed toward it. Her breath quickened. Naomi smiled, gentle and patient, the way she had when she had been alive. One step, she repeated. Helen lifted her foot, and the house sighed in relief. A chain, how mercy could rot into obligation, how a mother's desperate prayer could echo through centuries as a curse her daughters were born already owing. Helen let her hand fall from the frame. It doesn't have to be like this, she whispered, though the words felt small, fragile, the way a breath fogs and disappears on cold glass. Naomi tilted her head, the candlelight rippling across her face in a way that made her features shift, alive one heartbeat, painted the next. It does, she said softly. It always has. The women in the portrait seemed to lean forward ever so slightly, as if they could sense her wavering. Their hands, frozen all afternoon, now extended a fraction more. Not movement exactly, more like anticipation. Helen stepped back. I'm not Abigail, she said. I'm not her. I didn't make that bargain. You inherited it, Naomi replied, just like they did. She gestured toward the line of women. They all cursed Abigail. They all begged. They all said it wasn't fair. Helen swallowed. The black dress felt heavier now, as if soaked through with the grief of every woman who had worn it before her. And what happened to them? She asked, voice barely above a breath. Naomi's eyes filled with something too deep to be sadness. The same thing that will happen to you. A pause. They sat. The candles flickered, every flame bowing inward, as if acknowledging the truth. A shiver ran through the air, cold even for February. The kind of cold that seeped into bone, into memory, into the lineage itself. Helen backed away from the portrait and found herself stepping into the center of the parlor where the chair waited. Its carved legs gleamed softly. Its velvet seat looked impossibly deep, impossibly soft. The kind of soft that could swallow a body whole. No, she said again, but the word trembled this time, a reed bending in winter wind. You don't have to be afraid, Naomi said. You'll still be you, just quieter. Quieter? Naomi nodded, like a breath behind glass. The house creaked, not with settling, but with shifting, as though the walls were leaning closer to hear her decision. Helen turned toward the window. Outside, the evening was absolute. A black sheet draped over the world. The driveway was swallowed, the trees erased. Even the moon refused to show itself. The world beyond the house no longer existed. Only this room existed. Only this choice. Mother, Naomi said, stepping closer, it's time. The line of women moved, a unified exhale. Their feet didn't touch the floor so much as glide over it, dresses whispering like pages turning in a book too old to open. Helen took one step back. Her heel brushed the leg of the chair. She froze. Every candle flame stilled, not flickering, not bending but pausing, as if the air itself had stopped moving. Helen closed her eyes. She saw Abigail's trembling hands signing whatever document had sealed them all. She saw Florence clutching her own daughter tight one last time. She saw generations of women walking down the same hallway, wearing this same fear like a veil. She saw Naomi, trapped in pain, trapped in memory, waiting for her. And then, through the darkness of her closed eyes, she felt the slightest touch on her cheek, a child's fingers, cool as marble. "Sit," Naomi whispered, "and I won't be alone anymore." The room inhaled. The portrait inhaled. The house inhaled. Helen opened her eyes. Her hands were on the chair, her body bending, her breath trembling, and every woman in the portrait leaned forward as one. Waiting have been inevitability itself. Helen felt the chill of Naomi's hand seep into her, deep into her bones, but it was not cruel. It was firm, certain, like gravity, like a truth that could not be argued with. The glow from the portrait intensified, the 12 women behind her leaning forward in silent, patient expectation. Their outstretched hands quivered, not with movement, but with the weight of years, of centuries of waiting. Helen's body, already feeling lighter, began to shimmer along the edges, the contours softening, blending with the canvas before her. "It's okay," Naomi whispered. "You're home now. You'll stay here and you'll belong. That's all it asks." Helen tried to speak, tried to summon the last of her resistance, but words tangled in her throat. All she could do was look at the empty chair in front of her, the chair that had claimed so many before and now claimed her too. A warmth spread through her chest, not comfort exactly, but a strange, suffocating serenity, like sinking into water just before fully submerging. The room hummed around her, the candle flames flickering in unison, reflecting off the surfaces like countless eyes watching, waiting. She saw Abigail's expression, the first mother, the architect of the bargain, carved forever in oil. It was not cruel, not angry, simply knowing. The choice had been made long before, and yet Helen felt her own surrender, her own acceptance, threading through the centuries of accumulated obligation. Naomi's hand squeezed her shoulder once more. "You'll see," she said softly. "We're all waiting for you to finish it. Just sit." Helen inhaled one last time, filling her lungs with the scent of lemon oil, dust, and something sharper she could not name. Then she relaxed completely into the chair. Her body was gone, or nearly gone. She felt herself folding into the canvas, the warmth of the oil and pigment embracing her, pressing her gently into the rhythm of the portrait. The 12 women leaned fully forward now, their hands touching the space she once occupied. Her features began to form in the delicate brushstrokes, the subtle shadows and highlights capturing her very essence. Naomi stepped back, a serene figure smiling patiently. "Now you're part of it. Now you belong. Now it's complete." The portrait glowed softly for a moment longer, then stilled. The room fell silent except for the faint whisper of the wind outside. Helen's chair was empty, but the 13 figures, now aligned in perfect harmony, reached forward as they always had, hands connected, eyes looking outward, eternal and patient. Naomi turned, the faintest trace of a smile lingering, and walked to the window. Outside, the February night lay dark and quiet, the wind stirring the bare branches. The house seemed lighter somehow, but still held the weight of its history, its bargains, its daughters, its mothers. Helen's voice was gone, her body gone, but her presence remained, woven into the lineage, into the portrait, into the very soul of the house. And somewhere, faint but certain, a child's laughter echoed, soft as candlelight, threading through centuries of waiting. The portrait was finished. and the line of Pritchard women, stretching back to Abigail and forward into eternity, reached on. Holding her place in the canvas, Helen had become both witness and sacrifice, the final brushstroke that completed centuries of expectation. The 12 women behind her shifted slightly, a subtle ripple like wind across still water, their hands reaching not in menace, but in the inevitable embrace of lineage of obligation fulfilled. Their faces, timeless and unreadable, carried the weight of every choice, every birth, every life preserved and every life given. Helen tried to step back to reclaim her body, but it was gone, not violently, not tragically, but as if it had never been separate. Her essence spread across the frame, saturating the canvas with the warmth and depth of her own life, filling the empty chair with a presence that had been missing for far too long. The red of remembered fire, of loss, of survival, mixed seamlessly with the muted tones of centuries, binding her story to theirs. Naomi, standing free from the painting, watched silently, her smile steady, patient, impossibly calm. She was alive, untouched by the obligations of the portrait, the one spared to carry memory forward, to grow, to inherit the house and the story, and someday, perhaps, the seat at the front once more. The parlor seemed to breathe with the rhythm of all those who had come before, the light shifting through the tall windows, catching the edges of paint and oil, transforming shadow into warmth, melancholy into something bearable, almost tender. The house held its breath, as it had every February for generations, waiting for the next. Helen's awareness lingered in the frame, a consciousness embedded in brushstrokes, a pulse beneath the paint. She could feel the lineage stretching backward, reaching forward, infinite in its persistence. She had become the thread that wove past and future together, the hinge that allowed the line of Pritchard women to endure. Her daughter stepped forward, small, human, imperfectly real, holding the space Helen had vacated. Naomi's eyes glimmered with the knowledge of what had been done, the mercy and the cost intertwined, the bargain kept without question. She would grow, she would live, she would one day watch her own daughter wonder at the waiting women, at the portraits that demanded attention at the price of being remembered. And the house exhaled, the shadows softened. The portrait, now complete, radiated the quiet authority of 170 years of women, and Helen's final act settled into permanence. The chair at the front held a presence that was alive, confident, melancholic, inevitable. The line continued, unbroken, ready to receive the next life that would step forward, and the cycle would endure. In that parlor in the fading February light, it was clear. The portrait didn't steal the dead. It preserved the living. It was survival painted in oil, inheritance etched in pigment, and Helen, at last, understood the pattern that had been centuries in the making. Abigail had saved a child, and in doing so, had ensured that every daughter to come would sit, willingly or not, and keep the line alive. And the waiting would never end. Sitting, Florence had ensured her daughter's survival, and so it continued, a chain of mothers, one generation after another, each trading their own lives to secure the next. Love twisted into obligation, life purchased at the price of life. "Happy birthday, Mother," Naomi whispered, the flicker of candlelight dancing across her small face before the flames went out, leaving the room in quiet darkness. By morning, someone would enter the house to tidy it, to arrange the neatness of inherited rooms. They would find it empty. No trace of Helen Pritchard remained, save for an unmade bed, a half-empty cup of coffee, and the small bottle of pills left untouched on the bathroom counter. Police would search. Questions would be asked. But the house had already claimed its dues, and no one would find her. The inheritance would pass on to Naomi, now 8, growing in the world outside the frame, breathing freely, aging properly, untouched by the portrait's demands. The cycle had been preserved, the pattern maintained. The painting was no mere art, it was a mechanism, a machine, a lineage of sacrifice. It measured life against life, time against time, ensuring the survival of those who mattered most. The parlor would hold the portrait, 13 figures now, each hand resting on the shoulder of the one before, all reaching forward, all waiting. The chair at the front remained empty, poised for the next daughter to arrive, for the next birthday, for the next young woman to step into her place, to continue the lineage, to keep the bargain alive. And on quiet afternoons, when the sunlight struck the east windows at just the right angle, if you looked closely at the figure in the chair, at Helen Pritchard, born 1993, died 2025, you would see not resignation, not peace, but comprehension. The understanding of a price paid, of a life surrendered so another could continue. The portrait had never been haunted. It was only faithful. It was the quiet work of mothers through centuries, of women giving everything so their daughters could survive, so every child might feel the ordinary morning light that the women inside the frame would never see again. And the chair waited, patient, empty, ready for the next birthday, for the next girl, for the next chapter in the unbroken chain. The room was silent, but it held a weight that pressed against Naomi's chest, a quiet insistence she could feel in her bones. She gazed at the painting, and in its shifting shadows, she saw the truth she had always known but never faced. Her daughter's life hung in a delicate balance, fragile as a candle flame, and the portrait promised a way forward, a chance to tip that balance. It was always the same. One generation standing at the edge, one choice to make. Her own mother had faced it. Abigail had faced it. Every Pritchard woman before her had walked this path, and everyone had understood the price. The price was simple and it was absolute. Sit and let the portrait claim you so that the child you loved could live. Naomi's eyes followed the line of figures stretching across the canvas. Each woman reached out, one hand resting on the shoulder of the one before her, the other hand pointing forward, a silent rhythm that drew the gaze toward the empty chair at the front. That chair had always waited, patient and inevitable. It had never been lonely. It had never been anything but certain. 13 women now, each caught between life and permanence, eyes fixed ahead, mouth set in that quiet, unreadable expression. And Naomi understood. The 14th, the 15th, the 16th, every daughter who would inherit this house, this obligation, this burden, would face the same impossible decision. To refuse meant loss. To accept meant surrender. And surrender was love in its purest, most terrifying form. The house on the Connecticut hillside seemed to breathe with her awareness, the light through the east-facing windows illuminating the figures like a slow, merciless clock. Shadows stretched and recoiled, and she could feel the lineage pressing in, a weight of centuries, of mothers who had lived and died and sacrificed. Naomi stepped closer, hand trembling, heart hammering, and for a moment she imagined refusing. Let the child fade, let life slip away. And she could feel the portrait's patient insistence, its immovable demand. It didn't judge. It didn't need to. It only existed to keep the chain unbroken, to make certain that the line of daughters endured. She realized then that the painting was not cruel. It was not some dark curse. It was devotion made visible, love pushed beyond reason, beyond fear, beyond mortality. It was the ultimate testament to the lengths a mother would go to protect the life of her child. And Naomi understood that there was nothing more terrifying, nothing more absolute than love wielded in its purest form. The empty chair waited. The choice was hers. The cycle continued. And in that parlor, bathed in the slow, unyielding light of late afternoon, the inheritance of devotion, sacrifice, and life stretched out into forever. Story 2. The alert blinked across Denny Costa's phone at 1:47 a.m., and for a heartbeat, he hesitated. He'd been idling outside the shuttered gas station on Route 290 for nearly an hour, the engine humming just enough to keep the Camry's heater from dying in the freezing night. His shift should have ended in 13 minutes, but the city didn't care about schedules, and neither did the stack of overdue bills he'd been ignoring since the collection call started. This ping was different, not the usual in-town short hop, the kind that paid barely enough to cover gas. This was long haul, Boston to Albany, 6, maybe 7 hours. The kind of ride that popped up once a year, reserved for executives stranded by a canceled flight or someone desperate to get to a meeting that couldn't be missed. $847. His chest tightened. The rating looked clean, 5 stars, 183 reviews, 3-year-old account. Nothing suspicious. Yet the timing, the hour, the isolation, it made his scalp crawl the way it used to on construction sites, when holding a ladder felt suddenly unstable under a stranger's hand. The acceptance timer ticked down. 15:14. He glanced at the folded hospital note tucked in the glove box, Lucy's surgery schedule staring back at him in the dim light. One wrong move tonight could cost more than money. One wrong ride, one wrong turn, and he couldn't afford to think about what that meant. But the countdown didn't wait. 13:12, and Denny's fingers hovered over the screen, every instinct screaming both caution and inevitability. This wasn't just another night behind the wheel. Something about the request whispered danger, and yet, against every warning in his body, the promise of money and the weight of responsibility pulled him forward. He pressed accept. The screen lit up with the address, a distant house off a quiet road. No reviews, no details beyond the coordinates. The Camry's heater rattled, indifferent to his anxiety. Denny exhaled, gripping the wheel, and started the engine into the long, dark stretch ahead, unaware that from somewhere just beyond the shadows someone or something was already watching. Because staring at the screen made his stomach twist, the number blinking at him like a taunt. $14,780. The sum that insurance refused to touch. The barrier between his daughter and the chance to walk without pain for the first time in years. 8 seconds on the countdown, and Denny's thumb hovered, trembling. He pressed accept. The destination appeared. Weston, a neighborhood where every property seemed shielded by thick hedges and impossibly long driveways that vanished into darkness. Denny had only been through here twice before, both times lost, both times feeling like an outsider in a world that wasn't made for him. The GPS guided him down winding lanes lined with shadowed trees. The houses invisible, but for the faint gleam of security lights. Every turn drew him deeper into quiet isolation. At 2:03 a.m., he eased into a driveway that bent almost a quarter mile before unveiling a circular front courtyard. The house at the center looked plucked from an old European fantasy, all stone, gables, and heavy wooden doors. At the top of the steps, a lone figure stood, backlit by the open doorway. Denny killed the engine and waited, eyes fixed through the rearview mirror. The man remained motionless, hands tucked in a sleek overcoat, head cocked slightly as though listening to a sound only he could hear. After an unnervingly long pause, the figure descended the steps and circled to the passenger side. Denny pressed the unlock button. The dome light flickered, illuminating the man fully for the first time. He was maybe in his late 40s, impeccably groomed, the kind of precision that spoke of expensive barbers and attention to every detail. Dark hair threaded with silver, wire-rimmed glasses reflecting the interior light. Charcoal slacks paired with a black turtleneck beneath the coat. His polished shoes clicked against the worn floor mat as he settled in beside Denny. A faint scent of cedar clung to him, mixed with something clinical, sterile, that made Denny's spine stiffen. The man clicked his seat belt into place with deliberate care, then turned slowly, eyes locking onto Denny's. The chill that crawled down Denny's back wasn't just from the night air. "Mr. Costas," the man said, his voice low, calm, precise, like a doctor delivering news nobody wants to hear. "Thank you for accepting this ride." Denny swallowed. He didn't yet know the danger that had just slid into his passenger seat, the kind of danger that wasn't announced by sirens or alarms, but by an unsettling stillness that pressed against him from the shadows outside and the polished veneer of the man beside him. The Camry shivered beneath his hands as if sensing it too. This wasn't just a ride. This was a crossing into something he couldn't yet name, a path that led far beyond money, beyond schedules, beyond survival. And somewhere deep in the silence between the engine and the man's quiet gaze, Denny realized that he was being watched, and that watching was patient, deliberate, and unyielding. "Short notice, I know," the man said, calm as ice. Denny kept his gaze on the road, his fingers gripping the wheel tighter. "It's a long drive. You sure you don't want to fly?" "I'm sure," Denny muttered. The GPS had already mapped out 6 hours and 43 minutes west on I-90, straight to Albany. He eased the car down the twisting driveway, watching the grand house fade behind a wall of trees, swallowed by shadows. 5 minutes into the trip, a gloved hand tapped the phone mounted on the dash. "Cancel the ride." Denny froze. "What?" "Cancel it," the man repeated, calm and deliberate. "After pickup, the platform will charge you double. Cash," he added, flipping open a leather wallet and revealing stacks of crisp bills, 2100s new and sharp. $2,000. Cancel the ride. Denny stared, every nerve screamed danger. "Why?" "Privacy," the man said softly, eyes fixed on the dark highway. "The app records everything, location, speed, route. I prefer this trip off the record." Denny's scalp prickled. Every instinct screamed to pull over, hand the money back, walk away. But $2,000 cash, untouched by taxes, no platform fees, it was impossible to ignore. And Lucy's surgery, $14,780. He swallowed, thumb hovering, then finally pressed cancel. 20 minutes later, silence broke. The Camry rolled west through blackened highways, lights flickering far off in some nameless town. Only the occasional 18-wheeler cut through the night. "Your daughter, Lucy," the man said, voice soft, almost conversational. "How old is she now?" Denny's heart hammered. "What, Lucy?" His hand shook on the wheel. "She's 16. How do you know her name?" The man didn't look at him, eyes tracing the darkness outside. "The limp. I know it's gotten worse. The doctors said she'll need surgery soon or it becomes permanent." Denny's mouth went dry. He tried to shake it off. I don't know what you're talking about." "The surgery costs $14,780 out of pocket," the man said. "Insurance covers the rest, but $14,780, that's a mountain for someone in your situation." His eyes, calm and unblinking in the dashboard glow, bored into Denny's. "The collection agencies are calling," he added. "Third Coast Financial, right? Between 9 and 11 every morning. You don't answer anymore." Denny's throat tightened. "Get out, I'm pulling over, get out of my car." The man's gaze never wavered. "We're on a highway, Mr. Costas. It's 2:30 a.m. Where exactly would you go?" Denny eased off the accelerator. The Camry dropped from 70 to 60. The world outside was dark, empty, but inside the car, a weight pressed down that made every decision impossible. He realized then, he wasn't just driving to Albany. He was driving into something he couldn't see, a danger that had already calculated his fear, his desperation, and was waiting for him to make a single wrong move. Denny's mind raced, the highway a black ribbon stretching endlessly under the dim glow of streetlights. His hands gripped the wheel like a lifeline, knuckles white. He stole a glance in the rearview mirror, nothing but emptiness. Ahead, the asphalt blurred in shadows. "You're not a normal passenger," Denny muttered, voice tight. What are you?" The man tilted his head, a faint smile playing across his lips that never reached his eyes. "What do you think I am?" "I think you need to tell me who you are, and how you know about my daughter." "Your daughter," the man repeated slowly, savoring the words. "You haven't seen her in 3 years, have you? Not since the restraining order. Not since that night." The Camry wobbled. Denny yanked it back into the lane, scraping close to the rumble strips. "You don't know anything about that." "Angela filed the papers back in March 2022, the man said, calm and deliberate. "Claimed you showed up drunk at school, threatened her husband when he intervened. The judge granted the order and you let it stand. Let her think you didn't care enough to fight." Denny's vision narrowed. The white lines on the asphalt seemed to pulse with his heartbeat. "Who sent you, Angela? Is this some kind of—" "No one sent me," the man interrupted softly. "Then how do you know all this?" Denny's voice trembled, fingers tightening on the wheel. From his coat pocket, the man produced a phone, its screen glowing like a cold beacon in the dark. Denny's body tensed, foot hovering over the brake. "I know many things," the man said, scrolling. "The night shift at the Sovereign Bank. Your injury in 2021, same leg as your daughter's limp. The prescription you refilled for 18 months before your doctor cut you off. The bar on Huntington Avenue where you used to drink. Your drive home on November 3rd, 2019. Denny's face went pale. His hands trembled on the wheel. "There was a woman, Carolyn Ritchie, 37 years old, crossing in the crosswalk. You hit her going 45 in a 35 zone, broke her pelvis, fractured her skull. She died at the scene." The words clung to the air like smoke. Denny's chest tightened. Each breath was a struggle. The car had transformed into a pressure chamber, the darkness outside pressing in, the phone's glow illuminating every ounce of guilt, every shadow of a secret he thought buried. The road stretched endlessly, but Denny knew there was nowhere to run, nowhere to hide, and someone, or something, had already mapped every misstep, every failure, every choice that had led him here. Denny's chest tightened, each breath a struggle as the night pressed down around him. The highway stretched ahead in a smear of yellow and black, the lights streaking like molten paint across the windshield. There were no witnesses. The man's voice was calm, surgical. "No cameras caught it. You didn't stop. You drove home, hid the car, drank yourself into oblivion for 6 hours. When you woke, you went to a body shop in Roxbury, paid cash, told them you hit a deer. No one ever connected the dots. The police investigated. 3 months. Nothing. The case went cold." Denny's hands trembled on the wheel. Tears burned his eyes. "Stop," he whispered, voice ragged. "Peter Ritchie spent 5 years chasing the truth," the man continued, unflinching. "Private investigators, endless nights, obsession that ruined his life. Lost his marriage, his job. His son stopped speaking to him. Last year, he found something." The man held up his phone. A photo glowed on the screen. The Camry's front end, captured from a low angle as if someone had been lying in the street. Cracked headlight, dented bumper, scratches along the hood. Damage Denny had paid to erase 5 years ago. "Peter Ritchie knows it was you, Mr. Costas." Denny slammed the accelerator. The Camry roared, speedometer climbing, 80, 85, 90 mph. The white lines on the asphalt blurred in relentless strobe flashes. "And Peter Ritchie," the man said softly, "hired someone to settle accounts." Denny's stomach lurched as headlights appeared in his rearview mirror, bright and deliberate. How long had they been there? 10 minutes? 20? He had been too consumed by the conversation to notice. Now they were close. A black BMW, sleek, windows so dark they swallowed the interior. "You see them," the man said, voice calm, almost approving. It wasn't a question. Denny eased his foot from the accelerator, the speed dropping to 70, 65 mph. His eyes darted to the rearview mirror, stomach twisting. The BMW mirrored his every move, headlights on high beam, flooding the cabin with a cold, unyielding light. There was no escape. No sudden swerve would shake it. Someone was watching. Someone was waiting. And Denny realized with a sinking certainty that every secret he'd buried was about to surface in the harsh glare of the night. The glare behind them grew so bright, it washed the dashboard in ghostly white. Denny's voice cracked. "Who is that? Who's in that car?" The man beside him didn't even lift his eyes. "Does it change anything?" he murmured, thumbing slowly across his screen. The cold glow lit his features in a way that made him look carved from stone, expressionless, drained of warmth. Denny's mind was unraveling. Every fear, every mistake, every buried truth slammed together, forming a single horrifying picture. The strange request, the cash, the lonely highway, the perfect timing. "You planned this," Denny choked out. "You set me up. You dragged me out here on purpose." The man finally looked up, gaze steady and unreadable. "Tell me," he said quietly, "what do you think is happening right now?" Denny's pulse spiked. He crushed the accelerator. The Camry lurched ahead, 75, 80. The BMW followed instantly, never closing the gap, never falling back. A perfect shadow. Its high beams blazed so fiercely they carved twin sunbursts into the glass. "Stop following US," Denny shouted, voice cracking in the empty car. The BMW answered with 2 slow flashes. Not random, not accidental, a message. A warning. Denny swerved across 2 lanes, tires shrieking as he dove toward an exit ramp that seemed to appear out of nowhere. The car fishtailed, corrected, shot down the ramp and burst onto a narrow state road. He floored it again. Seconds passed. 10, 15. Nothing but darkness behind them. Then, 2 blinding headlights crested the ramp, drifting down with unhurried certainty. Like a predator confident, the chase would end on its terms. The BMW fell in behind them once more. Same distance, same speed, the same suffocating light filling the mirrors. "You can't shake them," the man said at last. His voice held no triumph, no fear, just truth. "They're not trying to catch you. They want you to see them, to feel them, to understand." Denny's knuckles were white on the wheel. "Understand what? What do they want from me?" "Retribution," the man whispered, "and not the quick kind." Denny swallowed hard. His throat felt too tight. "You don't get to disappear in an instant," the man went on. "You get to sit with it, every mile, every breath. You get to know exactly what's coming and that there's no turning back." 5 long minutes passed. No words. No sound but the engine and the tires humming over cracked pavement. Yet the presence behind them never faded. The BMW stayed locked in place, a silent, watching sentinel, a reminder that the night had teeth. Then, in a sudden burst of panic, Denny spotted a dirt road branching off into the trees. Without thinking, without slowing, he jerked the wheel hard. The Camry flew off the asphalt, diving into the darkness. The dirt with a dull thud, sending a small cloud of dust into the air. Denny's chest heaved, every heartbeat hammering in his ears. The Camry shivered where it sat, stuck in the soft mud, headlights cutting a jagged path through the shadows. The BMW remained perfectly still, engine humming, high beams fixed like unblinking eyes. It wasn't threatening, at least not in the usual way. It was a silent judge, a patient witness, reminding him that there was nowhere to hide. "Do you understand now?" the man murmured, voice calm, almost bored. "You made a choice. You can't unmake it." And now, he tilted his head toward the rearview mirror, where the BMW's lights glared like twin moons. Now they're watching, always watching. Denny swallowed hard, feeling the weight of every secret, every lie, every decision he tried to bury. The adrenaline in his veins was sharp enough to cut, his skin crawling under the night air and the hum of the BMW. He wanted to run, to drive forward, to throw the car into gear and vanish. But the mud held him, the trees hemmed him in, and the road seemed to stretch endlessly behind and before him. The man in the passenger seat stayed quiet, eyes flicking between the road and Denny, as if timing his next words to the rhythm of fear itself. "You aren't safe," he said finally, "and no matter what you do, they never will be." Denny's hands tightened instinctively on the wheel again. His mind raced, darting between escape and surrender. Every instinct screamed at him to fight, to act, to take control. But there was no control here. Not tonight. Not ever again. The headlights of the BMW pulsed faintly, a silent heartbeat in the darkness, marking the passage of time like a clock counting down towards some inevitable reckoning. And in that moment, Denny understood he wasn't being chased. He was being observed, examined, judged. And the road ahead, twisted and shadowed, wasn't a path to freedom. It was a stage. A stage on which he was the only player, and the audience would never look away. He heard the footsteps first, slow, deliberate taps sinking into the wet ground outside his open door. The night felt too quiet, the kind of silence that forces your pulse into your ears. "What do you want from me?" Denny breathed, barely able to hear his own voice. A low reply slid back to him, "Only what you were always willing to give." The stranger stepped out of the car behind him, and the interior light snapped on like a slap. For the first time, Denny saw him clearly. Sleek clothes that didn't belong anywhere near this muddy stretch of nowhere. Tailored coat, pressed trousers, calm eyes. Money dripped from every detail. But it wasn't the clothes that froze Denny in place. It was the face. Something about the man's features clawed at a memory Denny had buried too deep. Cheekbones shaped like a ghost from childhood. The slight lift of one eyebrow just like. No, it couldn't be. The stranger walked around the hood of Denny's car, shoes whispering through the wet ground, and stopped at Denny's door. He didn't speak. He didn't gesture. He simply waited until Denny realized he was expected to step out. With legs that barely belonged to him, Denny pushed himself out of the seat. The tire iron lay in the mud a few inches away, the metal already sinking like it wanted to disappear. They faced each other in the white glare of the headlights. Denny's breath fogged in the air between them. "You really don't recognize me?" the man asked, quiet, steady, certain. It didn't sound like a question. Denny searched the stranger's face, the jawline, the eyes, the familiar wrongness he couldn't place. Then it clicked. His stomach dropped. "Michael," he whispered. The man's expression didn't change. "She told you I died, didn't she?" Denny swallowed hard. "Mom, she said you weren't coming back." "She said a lot of things," Michael replied. His hand slipped into his coat. Denny's body tensed, heart slamming, but Michael pulled out nothing deadly. Just an envelope. Thick, heavy, stuffed. "She might have been right to keep us apart," Michael murmured. "But that doesn't matter now." Denny stared at the envelope like it was a snake ready to strike. "What is that?" $15,000, Michael said. "Enough to cover Lucy's operation." The words crashed into Denny like cold water. He couldn't even understand them at first. Everything inside him was still tangled from the fear, the chase, the sudden truth standing in front of him. "Why?" Denny asked, voice cracking. "How do you even know about?" "I started looking for you 8 months ago," Michael said softly. "I hired someone to dig, and he did. He found everything." Denny felt himself shrinking. Everything. "Angela," Michael said. "Lucy, the bills, the missed payments, the nights you sleep in your car, and the woman." Denny's throat closed. "The woman you left on the road," Michael continued, voice flat as a blade. "The restraining order, the panic you carry around like it's stitched to your skin, your daughter's worsening condition, things you can't outrun anymore." Denny shook his head. "You don't know." "I paid for thorough work," Michael said. "I know more than you think." He extended the envelope again. "Take it." Denny didn't move, couldn't. "I don't get it," he whispered. "Why are you doing this? What do you want from me?" "You're not ready to understand," Michael said. He stepped closer, close enough for Denny to smell the strange mix on him, cedar, and something sharper underneath, almost metallic. Then Michael's voice dropped into something colder. "You took a life, Dennis, and you walked away from it. For 5 years you've been pretending the past can't claw its way back. Tonight proved something." Denny shook his head violently. No, I wasn't. I didn't." "Yes," Michael interrupted. "You were ready. The moment you thought someone was coming for you, you went for a weapon. If killing was the only way to save yourself, you would have done it again." "That's not true." "It is." Michael's voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. "I had to see who you still were when the fear closed in. Whether you changed, or whether the man from 5 years ago is still inside you." He paused. "And now," Michael said, "I finally have my answer." The night air was thick, the mud underfoot sucking at Denny's boots as he clutched the envelope like it contained every ounce of hope left in the world. His throat was raw. What do you mean? Why me?" Michael's face didn't shift. Calm, precise. "Because this is your world, Dennis. You know the edges, the corners no one else dares step near. You survive when most would crumble. That skill, that darkness, it can save her." Denny's stomach twisted. "The money, it's real. Lucy, she needs it. Angela can't, no one else can provide it, but you can." Michael didn't flinch. He pressed the envelope closer, weight heavy against Denny's chest. "Take it, give it to her, let her live. That's all I ask for now." Denny's hands shook. Why help me after everything?" "Because you're my brother," Michael said simply. "Because monsters, Dennis, monsters can be useful." The words sank in like stones. No warmth in his voice. No mercy. "Because there's a debt that will never leave you from Carolyn, from Richie, from yourself. And now you'll owe one to me." The envelope sat there between them like a living thing. Denny's eyes darted between it and Michael's unchanging face. "There's always a price, Dennis," Michael whispered, voice soft, almost gentle. "You've known it since that night you left her on the road. The cost is simple now. Take the money. Save Lucy. And one day when I call, when I need someone who has nothing left to lose, who understands what it feels like to be hunted, you'll act." "Act how?" Denny's voice trembled. "Do whatever I ask," Michael said, flat and unyielding. "No hesitation. No questions. You've already crossed lines, Dennis. You've already survived when you shouldn't have. You've already proven what you're capable of when desperation strikes." Michael pressed the envelope hard against Denny's chest. It was real, solid, $15,000 in crisp bills. Denny's free hand went up automatically, gripping the envelope, the weight of it making his knees wobble. Lucy, her surgery, and the BMW, who's in that car? Michael glanced over his shoulder at the black sedan still idling in the shadows. Someone who ensures everything goes exactly as planned. You'll never see him again unless you screw this up. Denny's breath hitched. "And if I take this and fail, then Lucy doesn't get the surgery. Peter Ritchie sees the photos, the repairs, the evidence, and I." "You go to prison," Michael said softly. "Vehicular manslaughter, loss of everything left in your life. That's the other side of this choice." Tears burned hot tracks down Denny's face. I just want to help her." "I know," Michael said, voice calm, almost soothing. "That's why this works." He began walking back toward the BMW, the night swallowing his steps. Halfway there, he paused, glancing over his shoulder. "I don't need you to be brave, Dennis. I don't need you to be strong. I just need you desperate enough to keep moving forward when the world tells you to stop." Denny clutched the envelope tighter, the weight of his choices heavier than the night itself. Ahead, the headlights glared like eyes, waiting. And somewhere in the darkness, his life had just tilted onto a new, uncharted path. One where survival and sacrifice were inseparable, and where his daughter's future rested entirely in his hands. "Watching you." Michael's words hung in the clearing like frost. The tire iron lay half buried in the mud beside Denny's boot, but the weight of the envelope in his hand was heavier than any piece of metal. His throat tightened as Michael's footsteps grew softer, heading toward the shadowed BMW. "You didn't swing it," Michael said without turning. "That matters. I don't need a murderer. I need someone who's already cracked, someone who clings to life so fiercely he'll do whatever it takes to keep it." A chill rolled across Denny's spine. What do you want from me now?" Michael finally glanced over his shoulder. "Your first dues arrive in 3 days." Denny blinked. "Dues?" Michael didn't blink. $847. You'll bring it to the spot I text you every week." "That, Michael, I can't pay that. I'm drowning already. My hours, my car, my debts, I can't." "Then you'll work more," Michael replied, voice as flat as stone. "Drive longer shifts, cut sleep, sell something, or..." He paused with one hand on the BMW's door. "You'll discover the other methods of repayment, the ones that don't involve cash." Before Denny could speak, the man slid into the passenger seat, shutting the door with a solid thud. The BMW's headlights flickered as it shifted into reverse, the engine humming like a predator, satisfied its trap had been set. The car eased back, pivoted in the clearing, and rolled toward the trees. Red taillights glowed between the branches, shrinking, thinning, then vanishing entirely. Silence crushed in behind them. Denny was alone again. Alone with the night, the mud, his shaking breath, and the envelope he'd traded his future for. His fingers clawed at the flap. He opened it. Bundles of crisp bills stared back at him, neat, perfect, unreal. 15,000, enough to fix his daughter's legs, enough to drag him into a nightmare. Far off, the BMW sounded its horn 3 sharp blasts. A signal, a warning, maybe both. Denny raised his head. Michael stood by the clearing's edge, framed in the Camry's headlights. "My driver wants to get moving," he said calmly. "We've stayed too long. Someone might come by." Denny didn't recognize his own voice when it came out. Thin, fractured. "Please, Michael, don't take this from her. She's just a kid. She needs the surgery. I've messed up everything else I know I have, but she shouldn't pay for my mistakes. Please." The mud sucked at his knees as he sank downward without meaning to. Begging, something he swore he'd never do again, and yet here he was. Michael watched him with unreadable eyes. For a moment that stretched and stretched, Denny felt certain he would take the envelope back, drive away, and leave him alone in the dark with nothing but his guilt. Then Michael extended the envelope again, just an inch. "Take it," he said quietly. "Give it to Angela. Lie if you have to. Tell her you found it, earned it, stole it, anything. Just don't tell her where it came from. Let Lucy walk. Let her sleep without pain." Denny's hand flew forward like instinct. He grabbed the envelope as though it might vanish again. It was so heavy it nearly pulled his arm down. "Thank you," he breathed. "Thank you, Mikey, thank you." Michael's face hardened again. All softness burned away. "Don't mistake this for forgiveness," he said. "This is business." He stepped backward toward the BMW, his silhouette swallowed slowly by darkness. "And Dennis," he added, voice drifting from the edge of the trees, cold enough to stop Denny's heartbeat for a second. "Every step you take from tonight onward, I'll know about it." Denny stood trembling in the mud, envelope clutched to his chest, watching the night where his brother had disappeared, knowing this wasn't help. It was a leash, and tonight was only the beginning of the life he could never walk away from again. Denny knelt in the freezing mud, fingers digging into the envelope as though it might vanish if he loosened his grip. The night felt hollow around him, too still, too watchful. From the tree line, Michael's voice cut through the dark. "My eyes won't be the only ones on you," he said. "Every move you make from tonight forward, my investigator will see it. If you waste that money, if even $1 goes anywhere except Lucy's surgery." He stepped closer, his silhouette sharpening in the Camry's yellow dome light. "I'll come back, and I promise you, next time I won't be carrying cash." Denny nodded so fast his vision blurred. "I won't mess this up, I swear. I'll take it straight to Angela, all of it. I just need Lucy to get better." Michael studied him for a long, tense moment before turning toward the idling BMW. He walked a few steps, then paused and glanced over his shoulder. "Before I leave, pick up the tool." The words hit Denny like a slap. He looked down. The tire iron lay where he dropped it, slick with rainwater and streaked with dirt. His hand shook as he reached for it. "You lifted that thing because you were ready to cave someone's skull in," Michael said quietly. "Not because you're brave, because fear is your first language." "I didn't know it was you," Denny whispered. "I thought." "That someone was coming to end you," Michael finished. "So your solution was to strike first. That's who you are when you're cornered. That's the part of you I needed to see." The BMW's horn gave a long, impatient blast. Michael didn't even flinch. "I have to go." He took another step, then hesitated, turning back one final time. "The money's real. Don't be an idiot with it." A beat. And Dennis listened closely. Denny felt the air thicken. Don't look for me. Don't call me. Don't speak my name to anyone. As far as your world is concerned, I never stepped out of that car. I'm still the ghost you were raised to believe I was. Tonight stays buried, alongside everything else you've been running from. He opened the luxury car's passenger door and slipped inside. The headlights washed across the clearing as the BMW reversed, turned, and glided back into the darkness of the trees. The red taillights faded thin, then dissolved into the night until only the hush of the forest remained. Denny stayed where he was, knees sunk deep in the mud, the tire iron beside him, and the envelope crushed to his chest. The Camry's dome light glowed weakly above him, throwing long shadows across the clearing. He finally peeled open the envelope. Neat stacks of crisp bills stared back at him, clean, cold, perfect. $15,000. Enough to buy his daughter a chance at walking without agony. Enough to chain him to a man he thought was dead. He touched the bills with trembling fingers. His mind churned. Angela's exhausted texts, the overdue notices, the credit collectors, the landlord's threats, the power bill, the nights he slept in the car between shifts. All the pressure that had driven him to accept the ride request he should have ignored. And now this. Help wrapped in a trap, mercy tangled with chains. Denny closed the envelope and held it close, feeling its weight like a heartbeat that wasn't his. The woods stayed silent. No wind, no insects, just Denny's uneven breathing and the slow patter of droplets sliding off the branches above him. Alone with the money. Alone with the choice. Alone with the brother who had risen from the dead only to own him. Denny didn't realize how cold it was until his fingers went numb. The envelope lay open on the seat beside him, packed with more money than he'd seen in years. $15,000, enough to erase debts, buy time, maybe even start over. Almost enough to silence the guilt he carried like a scar under his skin. But then Lucy's face rose in his mind. The little girl he hadn't been brave enough to visit in 3 long years. The girl who walked with the same uneven step he once had. His limp, his mistake, passed on like some cruel inheritance. He could still remember her eyes that last day, frightened, confused, full of a kind of sorrow that hurt more than anger ever could. His breath shook. He pressed the envelope shut and set it gently aside, as though even touching it might stain him further. For a moment he didn't know how long he'd been kneeling in the mud, minutes, hours. The night outside hadn't changed, but something in the darkness hinted that morning wasn't far. He rose slowly, legs trembling, and made his way to the old Camry. Inside, the dome light flicked off, leaving him alone with the quiet hum of the engine and the weight of the past closing in from all sides. On the passenger seat, where Michael had sat just moments before, the envelope glowed faintly in the gray pre-dawn. The tire iron lay somewhere back in the clearing, half buried in mud. He didn't go back for it. The clock on the dashboard read 4:17. Somehow 2.5 hours had turned into what felt like an entire lifetime. He backed out onto the dirt road, the world outside empty. No BMW, no headlights, no trace of what almost happened. Just mud on his pants, and the truth sitting beside him like an unwelcome passenger. He reached for his phone, thinking of calling Angela, but her husband would answer. He asked questions Denny had no courage left to answer. Home wasn't an option either. A cracked ceiling, a thin mattress, and neighbors who fought through paper walls weren't comfort. They were reminders, sharp and constant, of the man he'd become. His grip tightened on the wheel. He saw Carolyn's face in his mind, the thud against the car, the impossible silence that followed. He saw Michael's expression in the glow of the dome light, familiar yet foreign, like two versions of the same man overlapped. And then he saw himself, standing in that clearing, holding a tire iron with a kind of calm that terrified him. How easy it had been to step over that line. How quickly fear had turned into something darker. By the time the highway came into view, one truth settled over him like a weight he would never shake. Michael hadn't been testing his strength. He'd been testing his soul. And Denny knew without a doubt that he had failed. The road ahead unfurled like a black ribbon, stretching into a horizon that felt both endless and empty. The dividing lines flashed beneath the headlights in a steady rhythm, almost lulling him into a trance. Westward, that was the direction his hands kept steering, as if the car already knew where he needed to go long before he did. Beside him, the envelope rested like a silent accusation. $15,000, enough to buy back a sliver of dignity, or to destroy everything if he made one wrong choice. It could cover Lucy's surgery. It could give her a life not shaped by the mistakes he'd carved into her world before she even had a chance to speak. But there were eyes on him now, Michael's, the investigators, maybe even the universe's. If he slipped, if he drowned in his own weakness, they'd come back and swallow whatever was left of him. His fingers no longer trembled. The fear that had gnawed at him during those hours in the woods had burned itself out, leaving behind a numbness that settled into his chest like cold ashes. He drove through the last shadows of night while dawn crept up behind him, washing the sky in a pale, bruised gray. Every mile seemed to tally up the failures that had led him here. The bottles he shouldn't have opened, the lies he shouldn't have told, the nights he should have stayed instead of running. Little choices, quiet betrayals, all of them adding up to this reckoning he could no longer outrun. He pictured walking up to Angela's front porch with that envelope in his hands, her surprised blink, the way her expression would shift, first confusion, then suspicion, then that careful calculation she used whenever she tried to decide how much chaos he might bring back into her life. Would she trust the gesture, or would she tuck the money away like something dangerous, unsure whether touching anything from him was worth the risk? And Lucy. He imagined her opening that envelope days later, maybe weeks. Would she sense where it came from? Would she understand the cost of what he'd done to get it? Or would it just register as another anonymous bit of good fortune, no different than a raffle win or forgotten bill in a winter coat pocket? By the time the two-lane road widened into four, early commuters were already filling the lanes. People in clean clothes, people who woke up to families that loved them and homes that didn't creak with loneliness, people whose kids reached for them instead of flinching. Denny's stare drifted to the envelope again. Michael had spoken one truth he couldn't ignore. Denny had truly been ready to kill him, not out of bravery, not out of protection, but out of raw, frantic survival, the instinct of something trapped and terrified. If the moment had stretched a little longer, he knew exactly how it would have ended, and the knowledge hollowed him out in a way nothing else had. He swallowed hard. He had almost become the monster he feared he already was. Michael's voice kept circling through Denny's skull like a wasp trapped behind glass. That's who you are. The accusation clung to him, weaving itself together with the hum of the engine, the whisper of tires gliding over the road, and worst of all, the echo he could never escape. That sickening thud from 5 years ago. Carolyn Ritchie's body hitting the pavement. the sound that came back to him in the quiet, in the dark, in his dreams. He kept driving. The sun climbed upward, thinning out the morning fog until the world was bright and exposed again. Cars began filling the lanes, rushing past him like he was standing still. He stayed tucked in the right lane, content to let the world outrun him. Just after 6:20 a.m., he veered off toward a rest stop. The parking lot was scattered with early risers, families wrangling sleepy kids, truckers stretching stiff limbs, office workers taking a last sip of coffee before the day swallowed them. Denny parked far from all of them, as though his guilt needed extra space. The envelope lay exactly where he left it. He lifted it, weighing it in his hand. $15,000. Every possible escape flashed through his mind. The maxed out visa, the overdue utilities, the landlord's warnings, the failing transmission that groaned every time he merged onto a highway, the cracked tooth he ignored because he couldn't afford the pain of the bill. This money could erase all of it. He could breathe again, really breathe. No more waking at 3 a.m. with panic squeezing his lungs. No more dodging phone calls or pretending the world wasn't closing in on him. And Lucy, she was 16 now, old enough to understand the way life cornered people, old enough to understand that sometimes survival came before sacrifice. Wouldn't she see why he had to take care of himself first? He opened the envelope again, staring at the rows of pristine bills. They smelled like a fresh start. He shut it. For 20 long minutes he sat there, watching strangers wander in and out of the rest stop, people who seemed untouched by the kind of choices that haunted him. They looked like they belonged in their own lives. He'd never had that feeling. At 6:47 a.m., he turned the key and steered back toward the highway. This time he headed east. East toward the city. East toward the house in Brookline with the white fence and the maple tree, Angela's house. The one he used to dream would be his home, back when he still believed he could be part of a family. Lucy lived there now, with her mother and her stepfather and their perfect, quiet life. A life that had adjusted, healed, grown without him. Traffic thickened as he got closer to the city. Cars stacked in lines, crawling forward foot by foot. Denny eased the Camry into place, the envelope, now tucked under a jacket, resting like a heartbeat beside him. Denny's pulse was a drum in his ears as he parked 3 houses down from Angela. The envelope felt impossibly heavy in his hands, and he couldn't shake the sense that eyes were on him, watching, waiting from some hidden car, some shadowed driveway. Michael's words echoed again. Next time, there won't be an envelope. He glanced at the maple tree, its leaves brushing the upstairs window he guessed belonged to Lucy. A faint glow spilled from inside, and he imagined her there, limping along the floor, a girl on the cusp of 16, still carrying the weight of his mistakes. Denny's mind leapt back 5 years to the sound of Carolyn Ritchie striking the asphalt, to Peter Ritchie explaining to his sons that their mother would never come home. The injustice of it, the absence of closure, it had haunted him relentlessly. And his own father, gone when Denny was 12, a ghost in the kitchen, a presence defined more by absence than guidance, loomed over his memory. Was this what he had become for Lucy? A shadow she feared, a ghost who had failed her, or something worse, an embodiment of all the danger he carried with him. The morning air was sharp with the first hint of autumn, the sun still trying to squeeze out summer's heat. Denny stepped out, the envelope clutched tight, and walked toward the house. Each step on the sidewalk was measured, hesitant, a negotiation with the past and the future at once. He reached the door. He could knock, explain, beg, or try to glimpse Lucy for the first time in years. He could hand over the envelope and hope his intentions were clear. Or he could leave it on the porch, walk away, and let fate decide. His hand hovered over the doorbell, frozen in the weight of the decision. The door swung open before he could choose. Angela stood there, dressed simply in a bathrobe, her hair tied back, face bare. The years had marked her, lines near her eyes and mouth, shadows of the life she had carried without him. A phone pressed to her ear, her voice mid-conversation. "I understand, but the procedure is." Her words faltered as she saw him. Surprise, confusion, fear, anger flickered across her features in rapid succession. She ended the call abruptly, eyes locking on him. "Denny," her voice was flat, steady, but brittle. What are you doing here?" Denny nodded. "I understand. You'll never hear my name. Not from me, not from anyone." Angela didn't look convinced. Her eyes kept shifting between him and the street, as if danger might roll up at any second. The envelope hung in her hand like a live wire. She wanted to drop it, but she couldn't. She needed it too badly. Inside the house, a door closed. A light flicked on somewhere deeper. Footsteps, light, uneven, familiar, moved down the hallway. Angela stiffened. "Go," she whispered sharply. "Right now." Denny took a step back. Is Lucy awake?" Angela's shoulders tensed. She didn't answer. Another step on the hardwood floor inside. Then a quiet voice, soft and groggy. "Mom, who's out there?" Denny froze. His heart clenched in his chest so hard it hurt. He hadn't heard her voice in years. Not since the day she'd watched him leave with her arms crossed, limping slightly, refusing to hug him goodbye. Angela moved quickly, blocking the doorway with her body. "No one, honey," she called back. Just go back upstairs. I'll be right there." Denny shut his eyes for half a second, swallowed hard, and took another step back. "I'm not trying to make things worse," he whispered. "I swear to you, I had to help her." Angela looked at him, really looked past the grime on his jacket, past the tired eyes, past the years of mistakes. And for a heartbeat, there was something else in her expression. Not forgiveness, but something close to sorrow. "I'll use it for her," she said quietly. "All of it, but after this, you stay away. If she gets this surgery, it's because of her doctors, her stepfather, her family, not you." Denny nodded. "I know it's better that way." He stepped back onto the walkway. "Denny," Angela said softly. He turned. "Whatever you're mixed up in, whatever this is, don't drag her into it. Don't drag us into it." "I won't," he said, voice hoarse. "I promise." And then the door closed. He stood there for a moment, staring at the chipped blue paint, the brass handle he once installed himself back when the world felt salvageable. A muffled conversation drifted from inside, Angela whispering something, Lucy replying in a sleepy murmur. He couldn't make out the words. Didn't need to. He turned and walked back to the Camry. His legs felt hollow. His hands shook as he reached for the door handle. The sun was fully up now, casting long shadows across the street, illuminating the life he no longer belonged to. The envelope was gone. Lucy would get her surgery. That was enough. At least he told himself it was. Denny slid into the driver's seat, closed the door, and let out a breath he didn't know he'd been holding. Around him, the morning moved on, kids heading to school, neighbors warming up cars, joggers passing by with earbuds in. all of them living ordinary lives untouched by ghosts. He started the engine. Michael's warning echoed in his head. His own choices echoed louder. Then Denny pulled away from the curb, the house shrinking behind him, and drove without looking back. He couldn't undo the past. He couldn't fix the years of absence, the mistakes, the fear he'd left behind. All he could do was drive away and hope that, somehow, the envelope, the money, the small act of care would give her what he never could. Denny slid into the Camry, the engine rumbling to life beneath him. The morning air carried the faint scent of autumn, damp leaves, the first crisp bite of fall. He gripped the wheel, staring at Angela's house shrinking in the rearview mirror, the white picket fence, the maple tree, the window with the light still burning. For a moment he imagined Lucy there, small and fragile, clutching the envelope, her eyes wide as she realized someone, even him, had fought for her. A chance, a moment of hope. The street was quiet now, the neighbors just starting their routines. Denny eased the Camry onto the road, merging slowly into the flow of morning traffic. Each turn of the wheel felt like leaving a piece of himself behind on that porch. He didn't look back. He didn't dare. The weight of the last few hours, Michael's words, the chase, the terror, the confrontation, the money, pressed down on him. A reminder that nothing was free. That every act, even a good one, came with a cost. He drove, past the schools, the coffee shops, the joggers, the commuters. The envelope lay quietly on the passenger seat, heavy with promise and consequence. Somewhere ahead, the city waited. Lucy's future waited. And for the first time in years, Denny allowed himself a thought that had seemed impossible. Maybe, just maybe, he could leave behind the shadow of who he'd been and keep moving forward. The sun climbed higher, casting long lines of light across the asphalt. He pressed the accelerator gently, eyes forward, hands steady, heart pounding but resolute. He would do this right. He had no choice but to do it right. And as the Camry disappeared into the morning traffic, Angela's house faded into memory and Denny drove on, not just away from the past, but toward a chance at redemption, however small, however fleeting. Denny lay there in the dim light, the fan clicking like an old clock counting down the hours he didn't have. His chest felt tight, not from fear, but from the quiet, crushing truth that had settled over him all day. He was back in the world, but he wasn't free. Not really. He picked up his phone. The screen was dark for a moment, then lit up with the reflection of his own tired eyes. 16 messages, all demanding something. Money, payments, promises he couldn't keep. And somewhere behind all that digital noise, he imagined Michael's shadow, tall and patient, waiting for Friday, waiting for him to step deeper into a life he no longer recognized. He shut the phone off. For a while, he just listened to the hum of the fridge, the occasional footsteps in the hallway, the faint city sounds drifting up through the thin apartment walls. Ordinary noises, normal life continuing without him. His thoughts drifted back to the intersection, the place he avoided for years. Seeing it today, the crosswalk, the asphalt, the traffic moving unbothered, it felt like a reminder carved into the street. Nothing stopped for what he'd done. Not then, not now. But Lucy, she was the one thing that hadn't faded with time. He pictured her running like she used to, hair flying, laughing. Then he imagined her lying in a hospital bed, waiting for a surgery that might give her that future back. And he wondered, not for the first time, if the money he'd handed over today was the closest he'd ever come to being her father again. He covered his face with both hands. On the other side of the city, Angela was probably getting Lucy ready for dinner, turning off lights, locking the door, living a life where he was a ghost, a cautionary tale she tried not to speak aloud. He couldn't blame her. As the fan clicked round and round above him, Denny understood something with a clarity that hurt. Redemption wasn't going to come from apologies or wishes or memories. It wasn't going to fall into his lap, and it sure wasn't going to come from Michael. But Friday was coming, whether he wanted it or not. And by the time the sun came up, he would have to decide what kind of man he was going to be. The monster Michael thought he owned, or something else entirely. For now, he closed his eyes just for a moment and let the darkness settle. Themselves, they didn't have a choice. But lying there in the dark, Denny knew that wasn't true. Choices were everywhere, small ones, sharp ones, the kind that cut deeper than any blade. He just spent years choosing the easiest path, the one that required the least courage, the one that let him pretend he wasn't steering his own ruin. He took a slow breath, the air heavy with the stale smell of dust and damp plaster. The fan clicked overhead, each rotation marking time he didn't have. Friday, 2:00 a.m. The trunk. The message replayed in his mind like a sentence already spoken. He wished for the smallest second that he could go back to before the bar, before the drinking, before the night Carolyn Ritchie stepped into a crosswalk and he became someone else entirely, someone he didn't recognize anymore. But life didn't move backward. It never had. And now, he wasn't the kind of man who got second chances. He was the kind of man people called at 2:00 a.m., the kind of man whose trunk was big enough. The kind whose brother didn't trust him with anything except darkness. He pressed a hand against his face, feeling the grit around his eyes. He hadn't cried in years, not since Lucy was born. He didn't cry now either. His body had forgotten how. Still, he thought of her, 16, a limp she didn't ask for, a surgery she needed, a life he'd broken long before she had a chance to build it. Maybe she'd run again one day. Maybe she'd laugh without wincing. Maybe she'd forget the version of him that slammed doors, shouted too loud, and disappeared when she was 13. Maybe she'd never know what the envelope had cost. His phone buzzed once, just a notification, nothing more. But it snapped something inside him anyway. He reached for it, then stopped, letting it fall off the mattress and hit the floor with a dull thud. He didn't want to see another message. Not from Michael, not from debt collectors, not from the world he kept running from. He closed his eyes. Not to sleep. Sleep wouldn't come tonight. But to try, for just a moment, to feel like the kind of man who could still choose something better, even if he wasn't sure what that was. But the truth lingered in the shadows of the room, heavy and honest. Monsters didn't care about hope. Monsters cared about orders, about debts, about the next thing that needed to be done. And when Friday came, Denny knew exactly which version of himself would get behind the wheel. The weight of it pressed on him like concrete. Every step he'd taken, every bad decision, every cowardly escape had led here. The night Carolyn Ritchie fell, the nights he drank to blur the memory, the empty apartments, the unpaid bills, the lies he told himself, they all added up. Tonight, with the tire iron in the mud and his hands shaking around the envelope, he realized the truth. He wasn't a hero. Not then, not now. He was exactly the man Michael had measured, tested, and claimed as useful. Not strong, not fearless, not good. Just desperate enough to follow orders, to move forward when every instinct screamed to stop, to survive at any cost. This was just the reckoning. The bill finally coming due. And Denny Costas knew, with a cold certainty that made his stomach turn, that there was no turning back.